Before dawn breaks over Beersheba, an old man is already awake. You can hear it before you can see it. Rope being pulled tight across a wooden saddle, the soft stamp of a donkey's hoof on packed dirt, a blade being wrapped in cloth so it won't catch the light. Somewhere a rooster hasn't even started yet. The air still has the cold of night in it, the kind of cold that sits in your chest until the sun finally clears the hills. This is Canaan, centuries before any temple stands in Jerusalem, before any king sits on any throne in this land, a world of tents and wells and flocks scattered across dry hill country. Abraham is 117 years old, and his hands are not shaking. Not yet. He wakes two servants. He wakes his son. He tells them to bring wood. He tells them to bring fire. He straps a knife to his side, and he tells absolutely no one where they are going, or why. Pay attention to this, because it matters more than it sounds like it should. Abraham packs everything a sacrifice requires. The wood, split and bundled, enough for a fire that will burn hot and fast. The fire itself, carried carefully in a clay vessel so the coals stay warm. That fire must stay warm for 3 full days of travel across rough, sun-scorched country. The knife, sharpened the night before, probably, in the dark, alone, while everyone else in the household slept. They slept without knowing what the morning would bring. He packs everything, except the one thing every sacrifice requires. There is no lamb tied to that donkey, no ram, no animal of any kind walking beside Isaac on that road. We will come back to that missing piece. Keep it in the back of your mind. Here is the line you've probably read before, maybe in a children's Bible, maybe you heard it in a sermon, and never quite sat with long enough to feel its full weight. Genesis chapter 22, God did tempt Abraham. That's the King James wording. God tempted him. He tried to get him to do something terrible. He set a trap. But flip over to the book of James chapter 1 and you find this. God cannot be tempted with evil, neither tempteth he any man. Not rarely, not usually. God tempts no one ever, so which is it? Did God tempt Abraham, or did God not tempt anyone at all? You are not reading a contradiction. You are reading a translation problem that is almost 400 years old, built on a single Hebrew word, and once you understand that word, this entire story changes shape in your mind. Permanently. The word is nissa, and it does not mean what tempt means in English. Here's why the confusion even happened in the first place. The New Testament passage in James was originally written in Greek. It was written in Greek, not Hebrew, and the word used there is perazo. Perazo can mean either to test or to entice towards sin, depending entirely on context, just like the English word try. The word try can mean either to attempt something or to put someone on trial. When the King James translators sat down centuries ago to render the Old Testament Hebrew nissa into English, they reached for tempt. They chose tempt because at the time it still carried the older, broader sense of to test, to try, to put to proof. Everyday English has narrowed since then. Tempt has shrunk down in meaning. It almost exclusively means to lure towards something wrong. The Hebrew word never narrowed that way. It stayed exactly what it always was. This is not a story about a test you pass or fail like a quiz. This is not a story about a God who toys with grief to see what a man will do. This is not a story about blind obedience, swallowed without thought. This is a story about what happens when faith runs out. It is about what happens when faith runs out of answers, runs out of explanations, runs out of everything except your own 2 feet, and keeps walking anyway. You're about to watch 3 days unfold. You will see them unfold in real time. A father, a son, a mountain with no name yet, and a question Isaac asks halfway up, that you have probably never let yourself sit inside long enough to feel its cost. Stay with me. This is going to take a while to unfold, and it should. To understand why Abraham keeps walking, you have to understand what he had already lost, and already gotten back once. You must know what he went through before this story even starts. Decades earlier, God had promised Abraham a son. Not a nephew, not an adopted heir, a son from his own body through his wife Sarah. And decades passed, Sarah's hair turned gray, Abraham's back bent. The promise sat there, unfulfilled, year after year after year. For so long that Sarah laughed out loud when she heard it might happen. She laughed because by every measure that mattered to a woman her age in that world, the promise had already expired. That's where Isaac gets his name. It means he laughs, a joke that became a person, a doubt that became a son. Before Isaac there was Eliezer, Abraham's household steward, the man Abraham once assumed would inherit everything, because no son seemed to be coming, not ever. There was Hagar, Sarah's servant, and Ishmael, the son Abraham had through her in a moment of impatience with God's timing, a decision born out of waiting too long for a promise that felt silent. And when Isaac was finally born, laughing in his mother's arms exactly the way his name predicted, Abraham had to send Hagar and Ishmael away into the wilderness, watching his firstborn walk off. He watched him walk into the desert heat, with nothing but bread and a skin of water slung over his mother's shoulder. He had already buried one kind of fatherhood once, watching a son disappear over a dune. He watched him leave with no certainty he would survive the day. Isaac was supposed to be the one loss he never had to make again. Here's what most people miss about this story. Abraham isn't a young idealist with nothing to lose, marching up a mountain on fresh conviction he hasn't tested yet. He's an old man who has already paid in advance, who has already buried expectations. He rebuilt them out of nothing. He waited 25 years between the promise and the birth, 25 years of watching other men's sons grow up, while his own household stayed empty of laughter. He waited until the one child he never thought he'd hold finally arrived, and made his wife's name into a small, permanent joke between them. He has already grieved one son into the wilderness. He sent Ishmael away with nothing but a skin of water and a promise from God that the boy would survive, a promise Abraham had to trust just as blindly as he would later trust this one. And now, with his body bent and his hope finally settled into something solid, after a quarter-century of waiting, God is asking him to walk toward losing the only one he has left. So they walk. They walk for 3 days. This is not 3 minutes of dramatic crisis you could survive on adrenaline alone. This is 3 full days of ordinary motion, ordinary meals eaten around a small campfire. They shared ordinary silence, stretching out over miles of dust and scrub brush, with the worst thing either of them has ever imagined sitting unspoken in the space between their footsteps. You try to picture what those 3 days were actually like. Not the painting version, with the soft, golden light and the noble profile staring at the horizon like a man already at peace with his decision. Picture the real version, sand in your sandals, the donkey's slow, uneven gait, the smell of the campfire from the night before still clinging to your clothes, the ache in your shoulders from hard ground. Waking before light, packing up again, walking again. Isaac, probably in his teens by now according to Jewish tradition, was strong enough to carry firewood up a mountainside without complaint. He asked ordinary questions along the way, the kind sons ask their fathers on long walks, about the herds back home, about the stars the night before, about nothing in particular. He had no reason yet to ask about anything else, and Abraham answered him, somehow, without his voice cracking, without his hands trembling around the rope of the donkey's lead. He carried on a conversation about goats and weather, while a knife sits wrapped in cloth at his hip. 3 days is enough time to change your mind. 3 days is enough time to turn back or invent an excuse. It is enough time to tell yourself you misheard the voice that spoke to you in the night. Abraham doesn't, but it gets stranger. On the 3rd day, Abraham lifts his eyes and sees the place. Not a place. He sees the place. Like he already knew which mountain it would be the moment he saw it rising out of the haze on the horizon. And here is where he does something you might miss. If you read quickly, you might miss this. He tells the 2 servants, "Abide here with the donkey. I and the lad will go yonder." He separates them. He removes every witness except the one who matters. He leaves them behind, so that whatever happens on that mountain, only Abraham and Isaac will see it. No servant will carry home a story they half understood. No one else will ever say what happened. No one will know what was said or what almost happened on that summit. Isaac carries the wood now, on his own back, up the slope. Abraham carries the fire and the knife. And as they climb, Isaac speaks the question that has been sitting in every reader's chest for thousands of years, the question that splits this whole story open. "My father." Abraham answers, "Here am I, my son." And Isaac asks it plainly, the way a son asks a father something he assumes has a simple answer. "Behold the fire and the wood, but where is the lamb? Where is the lamb for a burnt offering?" Hold that question in your mind for just a second, because Abraham's answer is one of the most quietly staggering sentences in the entire Bible. He says, "My son, God will provide himself a lamb for a burnt offering." He doesn't lie to Isaac. He doesn't deflect, doesn't change the subject, doesn't tell him to hush and keep walking. He says something true that he cannot possibly understand the full weight of yet. God will provide. He has no idea how. He has no ram in sight, no plan for where one might come from on a bare mountaintop. There are no flocks anywhere nearby. He has walked 3 days with wood, fire, and a knife, and no animal, and he tells his son the truth anyway, trusting a provision he cannot see. He has no evidence for it, beyond the fact that God has never once failed to keep a promise to him yet. This is where the Hebrew word finally earns its place in the story. Back at the beginning, remember the line, God did tempt Abraham. The Hebrew word underneath that English verb is nissa. It does not mean to entice someone toward evil, like enticing someone with cake. It is not like a shortcut on your taxes. Nissa is the word used for testing the purity of metal, for proving whether something is genuine all the way through or only shiny on the surface. When ancient metalworkers tested gold, they didn't test it because they doubted it was gold. They tested it to reveal to themselves and to everyone watching exactly what kind of gold it was. They wanted to see how much of it was real. That is what nissa means here. God was never trying to find out something he didn't already know about Abraham. The test wasn't information for God. It was revelation for Abraham, and for every person who would ever read this story after him. Faith that has never been tested can still be real faith, but you don't know how deep it goes. You don't know how much of it is solid all the way through until something asks more of it than you thought you had. And this is where it gets remarkable. You are not watching a God discover things. You are not watching God see whether Abraham is faithful, like a teacher grading an exam he doesn't know the outcome of. You are watching Abraham discover it about himself, one footstep at a time. He learns it walking 3 days up a silent road, with a question from his own son, ringing in his ears, that he answered with the truth, before he had any proof the truth was even true yet. Let's pause here for a second, because if you've stayed with this story this far, you already understand something most people miss on a first read. Testing in the Bible was never a trap. It was never God trying to trip someone up. It was never a trap set in the dark, waiting for a foot to land wrong. It was a mountain road that revealed what was already true, one step at a time. It revealed the truth in front of the one person who needed to see it most. Abraham didn't become faithful on that walk. He found out he already was. If this close look at Scripture helps you, hit subscribe. Subscribe before we keep climbing, because the mountain isn't finished with Abraham yet, and it isn't finished with you either. And tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I read everyone. Now let's go back up the mountain. Because the hardest part of this story hasn't happened yet. They reach the summit, and now the pace of the story slows down to almost nothing. The writer wants you to feel every second of what comes next, the way you feel every second of something you cannot stop and cannot look away from. Abraham builds an altar. He builds it stone by stone, with his own hands, on the same ground where his son is standing and watching him work. He arranges the wood Isaac carried up the mountain himself on his own back. He places it on top of the altar he just built, stone fitted against stone the way he has built altars before, in other places for other reasons, none of them like this one. And then comes the moment nobody wants to read twice. Abraham binds Isaac. He binds him hand and foot, the way you would bind any sacrifice before laying it down, and he lays him on the wood. He puts him on top of the altar, the way you would lay a lamb. Here's the part nobody tells you. Isaac is not a small child by this point, not the toddler some illustrations like to draw him as. He is not small and unknowing in his father's arms. Jewish tradition has wrestled with this detail for thousands of years, and the historian Josephus recorded that Isaac was old enough and strong enough. He was fully aware enough of what was happening that he did not need to be forced into anything. Josephus describes Isaac receiving the news of what the altar was for and willingly presenting himself. He called it an honor worth his birth to obey without resistance, to go along with his father's God exactly as his father had. Sit with that for a second. This was not an old man overpowering a toddler. This was a grown son, capable of fighting back, capable of running down the mountainside faster than his elderly father could ever catch him, choosing not to. Jewish tradition has a name for this. They call this whole episode the Yeda, meaning simply the binding, and it is one of the most studied, most wept-over passages in the entire Hebrew Bible. It is central to the liturgy read every year. It is read at Rosh Hashanah because the rabbis understood something modern readers rush past. Whatever was happening on that mountain, it required the willing participation of both of them. Ancient commentators debated this story for generations, some focusing on Abraham's obedience, others insisting that Isaac deserved equal honor for what he chose to lay down with his own consent. The test was never only Abraham's. It belonged to Isaac too, even if Scripture never lets him speak again after that one devastating question about the lamb. Now the stakes climb past the personal. This stopped being about Abraham's heart a while ago. It is no longer just a father's private agony, carried alone on a 3-day road. It has become something between a father and a son. They both somehow, in their own ways, said yes to this. And underneath both of their choices is the larger question the whole story has been building toward from the very first verse. What kind of God asks for this? And what kind of God would actually let it happen, all the way to the edge, without intervening one moment sooner than this? Abraham stretches out his hand. He takes the knife. You need to actually picture this moment instead of rushing past it, the way you might have every other time you've heard this story, told quickly, summarized, or softened. It shouldn't be softened for a Sunday morning audience. The blade is in his hand, the same blade he sharpened in the dark 3 nights ago. His son is bound on the wood beneath him, not struggling. He is not crying out, having already said yes somewhere on that mountain in a way Scripture never bothers to record in words. There is no angel visible yet, no voice, no sign in the sky to stop this. As far as Abraham knows, in this exact second, with his arm rising, he is about to do the thing he has spent 3 days walking toward, and somehow still cannot fully believe he is about to do. This is the moment the whole story has been pointing at since before dawn in Beersheba. Every footstep on that 3-day road. Every unanswered question from a son who trusted his father completely. Every quiet hope buried in the words, "God will provide," spoken without proof, without a plan, without anything to back it up except 25 years of watching God keep impossible promises. It all collapses down into this single second, on this single mountain, with a knife raised over a son who said yes too. There is no music swelling in the background of real life. There is no dramatic pause for effect. Just an old man's arm, lifted, and a silence so complete you could probably hear the wind moving through the dry grass at the base of the altar. Now watch what happens next. And then a voice. Abraham, Abraham. His name said twice, the way it only gets said twice a handful of times in the entire Bible, always in moments that change everything. It happens in moments where heaven interrupts earth at the exact second it matters most. The angel of the Lord calls out from somewhere Abraham cannot see, in the 1 second where calling out matters. 1 moment later would have been too late. Lay not thine hand upon the lad, neither do thou anything unto him. The knife stops in the air, frozen the way your whole body freezes when you hear a shout. You freeze when your name is shouted by someone who never shouts, and then the angel says the line this entire 3-day walk was testing for now I know that thou fearest God. He says, seeing thou hast not withheld thy son, thine only son, from me, now I know. Sit with those 3 words for a moment, because they are the whole answer to the question we opened with. The answer is not, now I know you'll obey orders without question. It is not, now I know you're loyal to a command, whatever the cost. Now I know that thou fearest God. There's one more thing you need to understand before this story can land the way it's supposed to. The Hebrew word translated fearest here is yar. And if you only know the English word fear, if you only think of the way you'd use it talking about spiders or heights or the dark, you're about to miss the entire point of this climax. Yare is not the fear of a man running from a lion. It is not panic, and it is not dread. Yar is the kind of fear that happens when you finally stand close enough to something enormous and true that your knees go weak, not because you want to run. Your knees go weak because you finally understand how small you are next to how real it is. It is awe with shaking knees. It is reverence so deep it physically registers in your body. It is like standing at the edge of a canyon or under a sky full of more stars than you've ever counted, which can make your chest tighten without a single thing actually threatening you. Abraham wasn't terrified of God on that mountain in the way you'd be terrified of a wild animal. Abraham, for the first time in this entire story, fully saw him, and seeing him changed everything. It changed everything the knife was about to do. And right at that moment, Abraham lifts his eyes, and behold behind him a ram, caught by its horns in a thicket, as if it had been standing there. It stood there the whole time, waiting for someone to finally look up. Remember the missing piece from the very beginning of this story. The wood, the fire, the knife, and the one thing missing, a lamb. For 3 days, Abraham walked without it. For 3 days, he answered his son's question with a hope he could not yet prove, with words he had no way of backing up except trust. God will provide. And here at the exact second obedience finishes, and not 1 moment before, not 1 mile earlier on the road where it might have spared him 3 days of dread, the missing piece appears. This is not a story about a number of days, or a number of steps up a mountainside, or a number of verses theologians like to debate in footnotes. This is not a story about a past test. It is not about whether Abraham passed a test like a student turning in an exam he studied hard for. This is a story about a God who waits until the very edge of obedience to reveal the provision. He reveals the provision he had ready the entire time. Because the whole point was never the ram standing in that thicket. The whole point was what Abraham would discover about himself. He discovered things about himself and about God in the space before the ram showed up. In the 3 days of not knowing, the climb of not knowing, the raised arm of not knowing, Abraham takes the ram and offers it instead of his son. And then he names that place, the way you name a thing to make sure you never forget what happened there. He calls it Jehovah Jireh, the Lord will provide. Or, more literally, in the older sense of the Hebrew root behind it, the same root as Yar, the Lord will see to it. There's a reason this single phrase outlived everything. It was repeated for thousands of years afterward, whenever Abraham's descendants needed to remember that God shows up at the edge of impossible, not before it, not in a way that removes the walk. He meets you at the very last step of it. You can think about this story the way you might think about a parent walking a child toward a hospital appointment for a diagnosis everyone suspects. They suspect it, but nobody has said it out loud yet. Think of the long car ride where you talk about anything except the thing that matters. The weather, a song on the radio, what to make for dinner. You talk as if dinner is still a guaranteed thing. Think of the waiting room silence, where every clock seems louder than it should be, where you find yourself studying the pattern on the floor tiles. You look at tiles just to have something to look at besides each other's faces. Think of the small, terrible question your child asks you in that silence, the one you cannot fully answer. You can only answer with the truth that you will be there, no matter what the answer turns out to be. Abraham did not have a hospital. He had a mountain and a knife and a son who trusted him. Isaac trusted him completely enough to lie down on the wood without a fight. But the shape of that walk, the unbearable ordinariness of it, the love that keeps moving forward without an answer, that part has never changed in thousands of years, and it will not change for you either, whatever mountain you happen to be climbing right now, whatever waiting room you are currently sitting in. Now, here is the part of this story that should stop you cold if you've never noticed it before. A ram, caught in a thicket, dies in the place where a son should have died. A substitute provided at the last possible second on a mountain in the land of Moriah. Some Jewish tradition places that mountain at the same location where the temple in Jerusalem would be built. It is the same hill where sacrifices would be offered for generation after generation. And further Christian tradition has long pointed out that this same region, this same Jerusalem skyline, is where, roughly 2,000 years after Abraham raised that knife, another beloved son carried wood up a different hill on a different morning with a different crowd watching from a distance. They watched instead of 2 servants left behind with a donkey. Only this time there was no ram waiting in the thicket, because this time he was the one being provided. Behold the Lamb of God, a voice would say centuries later at a riverbank, pointing at a man instead of an animal, which taketh away the sin of the world. The same provision Abraham trusted without proof on a mountain with no name yet, finally had a face, and a name and a hometown, and a mother who watched him carry wood the same way Sarah never had to watch Isaac carry his. You don't have to take that connection further than the text allows, but you also cannot walk away from this mountain without noticing it. A father, a son, wood, a knife, a question about a lamb, and a God who this time did not stop the blade. So what do you actually do with a story like this? 3 days, a knife, a question about a lamb, and a voice that stopped a blade in midair. It stopped the blade at the exact last second. Here are 3 things worth carrying down off this mountain with you. Takeaway number 1. The word tempt in your English Bible, in this passage, is a translation choice almost 400 years old, and it does not mean what it sounds like it means to modern ears. Nissa means to test, to prove, to reveal the quality of something real. It is the way you'd test metal rather than the way you'd set a trap. God was never trying to trip Abraham into evil. He was never running an experiment to satisfy his own curiosity about an outcome. He already knew the outcome. The test was never information for God. It was revelation, first for Abraham and now for you. Takeaway number 2. This one is personal, so let it land before you scroll. Let it land before you scroll away. The testing in your own life, whatever shape it's taking right now, whatever mountain you're currently 3 days into climbing, was never designed to show God things. It does not show him something he doesn't already know about you. It is designed to show you something true about yourself that you cannot discover any other way except by walking 3 days. You must walk toward an answer you do not have yet. Faith you have never tested can still be real faith. You just won't know how deep it goes, How much of it is solid gold all the way through, until something asks more of it than you thought you had to give. Takeaway number 3, and this is the one I actually want you to sit with tonight, long after this video ends and the lights go dark. The God who let Abraham walk 3 full days without a single word of explanation is the very same God who many years later walked his own beloved son up a different hill, on land some say sits in that very same region. He walked him through a crowd instead of 2 silent servants, carrying a cross instead of a bundle of firewood, and that time when the moment came, there was no voice. There was no voice from heaven calling out to stop it. There was no ram caught in a thicket at the last possible second, no last-minute substitute waiting just out of sight to be found and pointed to. Because this time, the provision wasn't standing nearby at all. The provision was the Son himself. Abraham got his son back at the base of a mountain in Moriah, walking down together the way they climbed. They walked side by side, both of them changed. God did not get his son back in that same way, not on that particular Friday, not with a voice calling out to stay the hand that mattered most. He gave him fully, completely, without a ram to step in at the last second, so that the door Isaac never actually had to walk through could finally swing open for you. Which moment hit you hardest? Did Isaac's question about the lamb hit you, or Abraham's 3 days of silence on the road? Tell me below. I want to know. Jehovah Jireh. The Lord will provide, not because the ram was there. It wasn't just hidden somewhere out of sight, waiting for someone to remember it existed. But because the one who asked Abraham to climb was always planning to climb one of his own from the start.